Hello everyone and welcome back, or welcome if you just happen to stumble upon this video. If you missed my last week in my life, I have a huge update. There's a new member of our family here. Miss Crosby James was born on February 7th, and today I am going to share my birth story. I loved watching birth story videos and birth vlogs when I was pregnant. They kind of gave me a good idea of what to expect, what to prepare for. And I just think it's so special to hear everyone's experience because everyone's experience is so unique and so different. And I admittedly did a really bad job of getting clips while I was actually in labor and giving birth because I just didn't. I had no idea how intense it was going to be. So I'm sorry that vlog was short and didn't give a lot of context or footage, but I'm gonna recap everything for you in this video. So I just fed her and I know that she can't smile on purpose, but she's smiling at me right now and it's so cute. Also, I apologize for the quality of this video if it's bad. I'm filming on my phone on my front camera because I just cannot get the back camera set up right. So we're gonna make do with this. Let's get into it. So my due date was February 9th. In my last vlog, I had started recording clips for my 39th week, and if you watched, you know how absolutely over it I was. I was so uncomfortable, so tired, just so ready for her to be here. And I fully expected at that point to go well beyond my due date because at my 39-week appointment, I was not dilated. My cervix wasn't even open. There were no signs of upcoming labor. So I kind of mentally prepared myself to make it to like 41 weeks. That week, I tried to do some things to get labor going. I was going on walks. I tried to get out of the house for some kind of activity once a day just for my mental health and to keep me, I don't know, sane during that period. So I think Tuesday we went to TJ Maxx and walked around a little bit, and then Wednesday we went to breakfast at a diner. And Wednesday, while we were at the diner, I joked like, oh, maybe these pancakes are gonna send me into labor. And as a first-time mom, it's really hard to know what to expect, to know the signs of early labor, and just to like anticipate what's coming. And I feel like there were so many times, if you've watched any of my videos, you know, where I was like, oh, I think this is it. I think I just felt a contraction, or I think it's happening. Everyone kept telling me when it's time, you'll know. And again, it's just so hard to conceptualize what that even means when it hasn't happened to you yet. But Wednesday at breakfast, I told Michael, I just feel like today's the day. I feel like something's going to happen. So we got home from breakfast. Wednesday was a relatively normal day. Nothing happened. Around 10 p.m. Wednesday night, I started feeling what I thought were faint contractions. And I should say, I didn't have a ton of Braxton Hicks during my pregnancy. And that's what I thought, I guess, those early contractions were. But this felt so different. It truly felt like period cramps, and it was so low and in my back. So I was like loosely paying attention to them, and Wednesday night, kind of timing them, and they started out around like 40 minutes apart. I would maybe have like one an hour, and they were lasting maybe like 40 seconds, and they weren't super severe. So overnight they increased to 20 minutes apart, and then as we got to Thursday morning, they were closer to 6 to 7 minutes apart. I did not sleep at all on Wednesday night because I was anxious, because I didn't know how quickly true active labor was going to come, but also they were painful from my perspective at that point. So I didn't sleep, but around 7 a.m. they were around 6 to 7 minutes apart, and I thought for sure we were going to have a baby on Thursday. We continued to time contractions, and they stayed 6 to 7 minutes apart all through Thursday morning. They were kind of the same consistency in terms of like painfulness, and they were still around 40 seconds in length. So not a lot of movement, unfortunately. And Thursday like mid-afternoon, I started getting random longer breaks in my contractions. I think I had one period where there were like 23 minutes in between contractions, and then they were around 8 to 9 minutes. We got back to 6 to 7 minutes Thursday evening, but at that point, the other piece of all of this is our dog Scout. We had debated all day on Thursday if we wanted to go ahead and take him to daycare and just have him be there in case something were to happen overnight, or if we wanted to keep him with us. And when I had that random stall out of contractions, it was later in the afternoon and we needed to make a decision by like 6 p.m. So we ultimately decided to keep Scout home with us on Thursday. And it was hard to make that decision because I felt like if we kept him home, then I was inevitably going to go into active labor in the middle of the night. And then we would have had to have a friend help us get him to daycare, which would have been fine, but it was just like an added level of stress and something that we needed to figure out. We made the decision to keep Scout home with us. My contractions started getting closer together over the course of Thursday evening into Thursday night, and Thursday night was another sleepless night. My contractions started getting closer and closer together over the course of the night. I kept on telling myself, if I can just make it to 6 a.m., we can get up, I can shower, Michael can take Scout to daycare when they open at 7, and then we can go straight to the hospital. So 6 a.m. was kind of my like goal line. And for the first half of the night, they were painful but manageable. They were around 5 to 6 minutes apart, and they were anywhere from 40 seconds to a minute in length. And again, pretty painful from my perspective at that point, but manageable. I could still like lay down through them. I was breathing through them. It was fine until 3 a.m. That is when all hell broke loose. Around 3 a.m., they started coming every like 3 to 4 minutes. They were lasting a minute to a minute and a half at a time, and they were so painful. I could no longer lay down through them at that point. Breathing through them was hard for me, and I will say I have a very low pain tolerance, so do with that what you will. But I debated waking Michael up multiple times and saying we need to go, but I was trusting my body, listening to my body, and I kind of had a feeling that this was just the beginning. So I stood up, I walked around, I leaned on Crosby's bassinet for like 2 hours because I couldn't really lay down through the contractions anymore, and it felt nice to kind of just like lean over and rock my hips through them. So I did that. Around 5:30, I like couldn't do it alone anymore, so I woke Michael up and he just like talked to me, kept me distracted through them. And then at 6, we both got up and got moving. He took a shower, took Scout to daycare, I took a shower, and I had a Core Power protein shake, which I'm so glad I did. I wish I had eaten more, but at least I got some protein in me. And then as soon as Michael got back from dropping Scout off at daycare, we went to the hospital right at 7 a.m. Fortunately, my hospital is literally 20 blocks from my apartment. It's a straight shot down the avenue that we live off of, which is super fortunate that it was so close. It took us 5 minutes to get there by Uber. And I will also say at this point, my water hadn't broken or anything like that. So I still didn't feel like a super big urgency to get there. I didn't think that I was going to have the baby in like the next 10 minutes or anything like that. But the contractions were just so painful for me that I knew we needed to go and I needed some medicine. So we got to the hospital and went to triage, filled out a bunch of paperwork in the upfront. We got into the triage room and they hooked us both up to monitors, me for contractions, her for her heart rate. And they pretty much immediately noticed that her heart rate was pretty high for her gestational age. She was running between like 160, 180, fluctuating there. And they wanted to see it below 160. So that was kind of the first red flag. Nobody made it a big deal like immediately. The on-call OB came in and checked my cervix, and I was only dilated to a 2. I cannot believe how painful contractions were to only have been dilated to a 2. The OB said typically since I was only at a 2, they normally would have sent me home, but they were a little bit concerned about baby's heart rate, so they were actually going to go ahead and admit me. Another thing that they said in triage was that it was very possible that I was going to need a C-section because of her heart rate. They really wanted to see it stabilize. So they were going to give me a bag of fluids, see how she did after the fluid. If her heart rate didn't stabilize any, then I was going to have a C-section. So something else that my OB said, she asked if I was planning to get an epidural. I said yes. And she said, okay, I want you to go ahead and get it the second you get into the delivery room, because if we have to take you back, I want you to already have that and be prepped. So first red flag of the delivery, a little bit scary. It's never fun to hear that you need to be admitted for an emergency reason. Obviously, I'm glad that I was admitted and was able to get pain medication because I was in a lot of pain, but my priority at that point became her and her safety. We were only in triage for around 30 to 45 minutes, which is incredible. I have heard horror stories of people being in triage for like 3 or 4 hours. I couldn't imagine if that was the case. But we got out of our triage room and put into a delivery room super quickly. They were also on the same floor, which was nice because it was a very easy transfer process. And yeah, got into our delivery room. It was massive. My delivery room was the size of my apartment. It's actually crazy. Got into the delivery room and they gave me another bag of fluids. I also will say I tested positive for group B strep during my pregnancy, so I had to get a penicillin drip in my IV pretty immediately too, because if you test positive, you need to have 2 rounds of penicillin before you deliver to protect baby from getting the infection. So I got fluids and my penicillin drip. The penicillin drip hurt so bad. It burned like crazy. At that point, I was like still processing everything that was happening, so I didn't think to ask for ice packs. So I just dealt with the pain for the first drip. But yeah, that hurt really bad. Also, I'm jumping all over the place. I apologize that this isn't super streamlined. I want to go back to the IV because I had heard horror stories about the IV and how badly it hurts. I also had heard that some people get it in their hand, some people get it in their wrist, some people get it in the crease of their arm, but that's not super common. I was fully prepared to get this IV in my hand and for it to be the worst pain I'd ever felt in my life. I made Michael hold my hand while I got it. And I'm not super queasy or like weird about needles, especially during pregnancy. I feel like by the time you actually get to labor and delivery, you're like, I've been poked a million times for blood work and vaccines and everything else. So what's another needle? But I will say I was pleasantly surprised by the IV. It definitely hurt. It was probably the worst pain that I felt throughout my labor process, but it wasn't unbearable like I expected it to be. So if you're scared of the IV, take this as your sign that it's not that bad. And again, I have a very low pain tolerance. So if I'm saying that, it's truly not that bad. I got it in my forearm, which was nice too, because I still had a ton of mobility in my hands. Obviously, I could bend my arms because it wasn't in the crease of my arm, but I already had my IV placed by the time I got to delivery, which was great. So back to delivery. I had to have a full bag of fluids before I got my epidural, finished that, and then they came in to give the epidural. Let me tell you, I have joked my entire life that I was never going to get pregnant and have a baby because I did not want an epidural. That was the thing that I was most scared of. Not the pushing, not the 9 months of pregnancy, not anything else. I was petrified of the thought of an epidural. When I say that was the easiest part of the entire labor, I would do it again 10 million times. I'd do it right now. I was so scared, and I know that policies are different at every hospital, so this is something that my hospital implemented. I could not have Michael in the room with me while I got my epidural. I guess that they do that because people can get really queasy, people pass out, they see the needle, they get freaked out, and they don't want to have to deal with that medical situation on top of the person giving birth. Michael had to leave the room. I've also heard that people will like hold on to their nurses to get into the right position. I didn't hold on to my nurses. They gave me a pillow, which is totally fine. My nurses were great and encouraging, and so was the anesthesiologist and her assistant, but I felt super alone in that moment. I was really anxious. I was gripping that pillow for dear life. And at this point too, remember, I was only at a 2, so I wasn't like screaming my head off through contractions. I know that some people will wait until the contractions are so unbearable that they welcome the pain of the epidural, but I also wasn't to that point. In my opinion, they were really bad, but I knew that we were also only at the beginning. So anyway, I was prepared for the absolute worst, and it was nothing. The numbing shot barely even hurt. People compare it to a bee sting. I'd say That's pretty accurate. If that, the IV hurt 10 times worse than any part of the epidural. I even said that to the anesthesiologist. I told her my IV was a million times worse, and she said that they hear that a ton, and that the needle that they use for the IV is actually bigger than the needle that they use for the epidural, but they don't numb you for the IV because obviously it's not as like a sensitive procedure. That's just a little fun tidbit. The thing that I was most scared about, and the reason that I didn't even want to get pregnant, was the easiest piece of it all. Something else about my hospital, I might not be describing this accurately, I'm just going based off of what I heard in the moment, but something about my epidural was they told me it was a combo spinal tap epidural. I know that for the first hour and a half, I got a much stronger dose of medication, and then it turned into like the normal like drip epidural that releases every 45 minutes or whatever it was. That first hour and a half was amazing. Once I got that thing placed, I felt no pain. I was on cloud 9. I still didn't sleep because I was just anxious about her heart rate, first of all, and then just like the adrenaline of knowing what was about to happen. I couldn't sleep through that, but it did allow me to relax, which was so nice. They came in to check me a little bit later and I was still at a 2, so they placed a Foley balloon, which basically just helps you dilate. They placed the balloon around 11 maybe, and they told me that it typically takes around 4 hours to get to a 4 or 5, which is when the balloon would fall out. So I was prepared to hunker down, wait the 4 hours. They told me they'd come back and check in 4 hours. I really didn't expect any action within that time. One of my nurses came in to just check on me maybe like an hour and a half after they placed the balloon, and she checked and she said that it was ready to come out. So I was shocked that it happened that quickly, but she took the balloon out, and I waited about another hour for the PAs to come in to do another cervical check. And by the time the PAs came in to do another cervical check, which was probably around 2, I was between a 4 and a 5. When the PAs checked, they asked if they could go ahead and break my water to keep things moving, and I said yes. So they broke my water, and this was around like 2:30 maybe. And when they broke my water, the first thing I heard them say was, she has meconium in her amniotic fluid, which essentially means that she went potty in the womb. It's not common, but it's not super uncommon either. It does happen, but it can be very dangerous for the baby, and for me it can cause sepsis in moms because of infection, and it can cause her to aspirate if she were to have consumed it while she were in the womb. It's also hard to know when it happened, if it happened an hour before, if it happened a few days before. There are just a lot of risk factors when that happens. So when they told me that, it added another layer of anxiety on top of her heart rate already being a little bit unstable. The meconium in her amniotic fluid was just even more anxiety inducing and really scary. They told me that all it really meant was that they needed to have pediatrics in the room when I delivered, and that pediatrics would take her immediately. I had requested golden hour and immediate skin to skin, but obviously with the caveat that if there were something like this to happen and they needed to take her immediately, they could do that. They told me pediatrics would be in the room. They take her immediately. They do an exam and make sure that she was good, suction if they needed, do whatever they needed to do. And of course I was completely okay with that. After they broke my water, they left. They said they'd come back and check me in like 2 to 3 hours, I think, and we just hung out for a little bit. During this time, I was starving. I had that protein shake that I mentioned in the morning. Thank God I did. I can't imagine if I hadn't eaten before I had gone to the hospital, but I was on a liquid clear diet from the second I got admitted. So I was surviving off of Jello and apple juice. I tried to have some bone broth, but it was not good. So I did not finish that. I tried to rest, but I really couldn't. There were just so many things at that point that I was anxious about. So just hung out with Michael, talked to him. We were keeping friends and family updated. That was the case for the next few hours. Around 5, so 2 or 3 hours after they broke my water, I started getting not pain, but pretty intense pressure. And that's something that they told me to look out for. They said if I felt that kind of pressure to let them know, because that means that it's getting time to push. The pressure wasn't terrible to begin with, but I definitely felt it, and it increasingly got more intense. So I let my nurse know, and they said, you know, that's a good sign, but we're gonna just, you know, let's ride it out for a little bit, and then we'll have the PAs come check. They were also monitoring my contractions, obviously, and I was having nonstop contractions. There were no breaks, and it was so bizarre because I could feel the pressure of the contractions, but I couldn't feel the pain of it. I would tell Michael, like, oh, a contraction's coming, or I would say, like, oh, this is a big one, and he would watch the monitor, and he'd be like, yep, you're right. Shout out epidural, because that thing was amazing. But anyway, after about an hour, the pressure got so intense that I was violently shaking. I was like, I can't do this anymore. They need to come in here and check me, because I think this baby is about to come out. The PAs came in, did a cervical check. At that point, I was at an 8. This was around probably 6 to 6:30. Something else I should mention about my hospital is that it's affiliated with Cornell Medical School, so there are a lot of students. This is something that I know people have a lot of controversial opinions on. A lot of people don't want students in the room, and I completely get it. When you are delivering, there are so many things that can go wrong, and I fully get wanting to not have someone who is in training in the room or doing any of these procedures or checks or anything like that. I personally was very okay with having students. I think it's a great opportunity for them to learn and like have the hands-on experience. And the reason that I was okay with it is because a student never did anything first or did anything solo. What would happen is the doctor or the nurse or the PA would do whatever needed to be done and talk the student through it, and then give them an opportunity to try if it was something that could be like repeated, like a cervical check, for example. Or in this case, when I was in an 8, the PA student checked me first and told the PA what she thought was going on, and then the PA verified it. So in circumstances like that, completely okay. I never would have wanted a student doing my epidural or anything like that, but they were like joking that they had been out in the hallway talking about my contractions, wondering how I was feeling because they were so strong and nonstop. As I mentioned though, at this point, I was violently shaking and in a ton of pain. So they also called in the anesthesiologist to give me another stronger dose in my epidural to help me relax so I could dilate the rest of the way, because I couldn't have stayed in that state to get to a 10. So the anesthesiologist came in, topped off my epidural, and they said, continue to wait it out. The next 2-ish hours were really hard. I was able to control the shaking a little bit. Thank goodness. My heart rate leveled out, but it was the most insane, intense pressure I've ever experienced in my life. Over the course of that next 2 hours, it got so bad that my body just started naturally pushing during the contractions. Like I could feel my body pushing. I wasn't doing it on purpose, but I was like, okay, we gotta get someone in here. It is go time. I'm about to have this baby in this room alone, so they need to come back and check. Around that time that I was going to voice this concern, my nurse came in and said that they had noticed more irregularities with her heartbeat, and with mine, they were noticing some weird things. So they took my temperature and I had a fever, and they told me that I likely had an infection, probably from the meconium, and they needed to start me on antibiotics. So I got a round of antibiotics then, and around that same time the PAs came back in. Actually, I can't remember at that point if it was the PAs or if the OB came in to check. I think actually it might have been the OB. Either way, someone came in, did another cervical check, and I was at a 10, and they said it's go time, and I said thank God. So I was on more antibiotics at this point, getting ready to push. The OB was there. She taught me how to push, told me what to do. We did a few pushes, and then she said, okay, great. So you're going to continue pushing through contractions and I'll come back and check on you. And I was like, excuse me? I did not know. I also don't know if this is common or if it's just my hospital, but I did not know that the doctor doesn't stay in there the entire time you're pushing. She did tell me that she had done 3 deliveries that day, and she had had one person push for 10 minutes, one person push for 3 hours. Obviously, people can push for a significant period of time, and I think average is around 90 minutes. So it does make sense that she wouldn't be in there the whole time, but I thought that was crazy. But anyway, so she left. I continued to push through contractions. I had no concept of time. I turned to Michael at one point and I was like, has it only been 5 minutes? And he was like, no, it's been like 30. I was like, okay. Pushing was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It is so exhausting. And I was doing 3 rounds of pushing per contraction. And by the time I got to that 3rd round, I truly felt like I couldn't even lift my head up, much less attempt to push a baby out. Women are incredible and we somehow do it. So I continued to push. The OB came back in and I fully expected her to check and then like bounce again and come back later, but she said, nope, this baby's almost here. I am staying, which was really encouraging, and I needed that motivation to continue to push. So she got dressed with her scrubs or like PPE, and we did a few more pushes, and I could tell we were getting close to baby being out, but I felt like there was this hurdle I couldn't get over. They were obviously monitoring her heart rate while I was pushing, and towards the end of pushing, her heart rate started to drop significantly. It got to below 100 at one point. And so before my last round of pushing, my OB said, if you don't get her out on this round, I'm gonna have to cut you, which meant I would have had to get an episiotomy, which is not fun and something I absolutely did not want. So if there was ever the motivation I needed, it was hearing that. So I did one more round of pushing, and with a little bit of help and maneuvering from the OBs and the nurses, she was born at 9:31 p.m. And that was the most relieving but also scariest moment of my life, because in the back of my mind, I knew there are all of these things that could go wrong from this point on. Something that I've heard everyone talk about in every birth story, every movie, every TV show is when a baby is born, you want to hear that really big, powerful cry. And I didn't hear that. I heard little whimpers, but I did not hear that cry, and I couldn't focus on anything else, but I was just waiting for that cry. They took her to the baby bed immediately, and Michael went over there with her. The pediatricians started working on suctioning because she did have quite a bit of meconium in her ears, her nose, and her mouth. So they were suctioning, and I could hear these little whimpers, and slowly but surely the cry started to get a little bit stronger. But I also heard a lot of suctioning, and I was just so panicked. So I asked my OB, is she okay? And my OB was great. She turned to the pediatrician team and she was like, guys, can you give her an update? How's the baby? And the pediatrician team said, she's perfect. We're just cleaning her up. And in that moment, I just started sobbing. It was just so scary, everything that happened in that last, I guess since they broke my water, but also just knowing her heart rate dropped so significantly, not hearing her cry immediately, it was so scary, and I was so anxious, and there were so many emotions, obviously. They got her all cleaned up, all suctioned, they weighed her, and then they brought her to me, and we got to do golden hour. It wasn't immediate, but that's okay. It was soon enough, and we just snuggled for an hour. It was the best. And then after that, I had to get, I think, one more round of antibiotics while I was in the delivery room. We were in that room for maybe 30 or 45 more minutes after golden hour, and then they transferred us to postpartum. And that was the delivery process. Once we got to postpartum, they came in, they gave me more antibiotics. During the time I was in the hospital, I think I had like 12 or 13 rounds of antibiotics. So that was crazy. but it got rid of the infection, and that's what's important. But once we got to the the postpartum room, they came in, did the test, gave me more antibiotics, medicine, all that good stuff, and then we got to chill for a little bit. And the funniest part of this all is everybody talks about like their post-delivery meal, sushi, sandwiches, whatever. By the time we got to my postpartum room and could order food, there weren't people coming in constantly. It was probably around like 12:30, 1 a.m. So of course, absolutely nothing was open. And my post-delivery meal was a 10-count chicken nugget from McDonald's. And honestly, it was incredible and I don't regret it. And I hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. So you know what? I'll take it. Honestly, the next day in the hospital was kind of a blur. They did more testing on her, gave me a lot more antibiotics and medication. Other than that, we just got to enjoy snuggling our baby. The last like kind of stressful, scary moment in the hospital was her hearing test. She had her first hearing test actually while I was taking a shower, so I wasn't in the room when it happened, but Michael was, and when I got out of the shower, he told me that she had failed, and my immediate gut reaction was, oh no, what does that mean? But apparently it's very common for babies to fail the first time, especially if they have like fluid or whatever in their ears. So it didn't give it much thought the first day. But Sunday, before we got discharged, she had to have a second hearing test and she needed to pass for her to be discharged, and she failed again for the bedside hearing that they do in the room. When she failed the second time, I was almost distraught, but the audiologist said that they just needed to take her for a more advanced test. And apparently it's not super uncommon for them to fail multiple times in the hospital, especially with just the bedside version. So they took her to the nursery and they did the more advanced screening and she passed. Thank goodness. But we were a little bit anxious, but obviously ended up being okay. And then, yeah, I was in the hospital for 24 hours after delivery, and then we got discharged Sunday morning. A lot of people have asked how we got home from the hospital. Living in New York City, we Ubered. We did call an Uber Black with a professional driver, just obviously being anxious first-time parents. We wanted to make sure it was a very clean car, a safe car, a good driver. It had also snowed significantly the day before, so there was a lot of snow on the ground. So that was just another reason why we wanted to make sure that everything was as safe as possible. But we brought her home in her Duna and yeah, called an Uber, which people think is so funny, but what else were we gonna do? Overall, looking back at the experience, it was really scary and a lot went wrong, but everything that needed to go right did, and I'm healthy and she's healthy, and that's really all we could ask for. She never got an infection, thank goodness. So she did not need antibiotics or anything like that to treat any infections. That was just mama, but that's okay. We made it out. And yeah, I'm just so thankful that she's here, she's safe, that we went in when we did and we were able to catch her heart rate fluctuation and that we were able to get her out. My hospital and my team, they were so incredible. Everyone was so great, so reassuring. I felt so confident in them despite everything that felt like was going wrong. They were so educated, so reassuring. They were very on top of everything. So highly recommend them. The hospital itself was so nice. Something else I can confirm, if you've seen the viral TikToks, if you've seen the rumors, yes, my hospital did give me a Chanel gift bag when I got discharged. And now we've been home for 2 weeks, which, well, we haven't been home for 2 weeks, but now she's 2 weeks old as of today, which is so crazy. The last 2 weeks have absolutely flown by. The first week I don't even remember. It feels like a complete blur. But now we're home and we're just enjoying every single second of it. She's had 2 doctor's appointments and she is a healthy little girl. She's in the 35th percentile for weight, 88th percentile for height, so she's long and skinny. And she is just perfect. And we're so glad she's here. That's the story. All of these weeks of buildup, all of the times I thought I was going into labor and didn't, we're here. Every single thing we went through was worth it because we have her and she is perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. That's my birth story. I probably will not get back into consistent weekly vlogs for a little bit just because We're still figuring out newborn life. I am posting on TikTok a little bit more, so if you like keeping up with what I'm doing, find me there. I'll try to post on YouTube though pretty regularly as well. We'll just have to figure out what those videos look like and what they are. But anyway, we're gonna go snuggle some more. Bye.